A man who refuses to be vulnerable is a lot like a cactus. Have you ever tried connecting with the cactus? You can't exactly get a good feel for it, at least not without getting hurt. But not only does nothing connect with the cactus doesn't connect with anything either. It goes both ways. The isolation is felt from both sides. Now that's a great strategy for a cactus, of course, but not so much for a human being. True connection is a two-way experience or nothing at all. See, the better we get at being vulnerable, the less figurative spikes we have poking out from us, preventing others from connecting to us, and of course us from connecting to them. We all have the potential to connect deeply with other people, potentially, but it's things like our fear of hurt, our discomforts, our past traumas, our insecurities, or our false ideas of what it means to be a man that prevents a lot of us from being able to connect with people and meet our potential. Of course, the same could be said for women, but for a variety of reasons, women tend to be a lot more comfortable being vulnerable. And so for the purpose of this video, I want to talk to the men specifically. So what is vulnerability, right? It's the opposite of shielding yourself. It's instead of arming yourself, it's taking that figurative armor off and leaving yourself exposed. It's voluntarily, it's intentionally opening yourself up. It's expressing who you are instead of who you want to be. Because who you are is flawed, right? Who you are makes mistakes. Who you are slips up in your speech. Who you are doesn't always get things right and doesn't always know what right is. Who you are may cry and has feelings. Who you are has thoughts and opinions that other people might not agree with. Who you are has doubts and can be scared and doesn't always know what they're doing. Vulnerability requires that we expose ourselves to uncertainties, asking questions, or admitting that we don't know something, against that background temptation to pretend like we understand and we know it all. Most importantly, vulnerability is about being honest with ourselves. I get it though, it can be hard to be vulnerable, mainly because of all these misconceptions that we tend to have, particularly as men, around what it means to be vulnerable. Like this idea that vulnerability is a weakness. I think subconsciously I used to feel this way as well about that. I used to think that if I express too much of myself, too much of my feelings, too much of my thoughts that I feel is contrary to what is commonly accepted, that makes me look weak, that makes me look weird, that makes me look like an outcast. And the reality is, for someone to be able to monitor the way they think and feel and check in with themselves and really understand who they are and express that, despite what the outside opinions might be or what other people's insecurities might be that they project onto you, it takes a lot of strength. It takes a lot of confidence and understanding about who you are and who you want to be. And it's just a shame that so many people will refuse to express themselves because they view it as a weakness instead of a strength. And it's a misconception that is preventing a lot of people from showing up fully and truly in their everyday life. Another odd misconception to me that I think holds a lot of people back is the idea that men shouldn't open up, that men shouldn't allow themselves to be vulnerable because that's a female trait. If anything, that is what I see as a weakness. The idea that men should be ashamed or embarrassed about exposing their true self to the world, as if being authentic and genuine is reserved for women. It's such a damaging philosophy. And it's weird that there's a taboo around that there's a taboo around a man saying that he has doubts about his future, or that he's scared, or that he's not sure what his next step in his life is going to be, and or having fears about being stressed. Like this all these ideas of being vulnerable and having it reserved only for women, that appears like a major weakness to me. And I think that's a misconception. It's a taboo that is holding a lot of people back, both men and women, but particularly the men. Another misconception that I think that I really fell victim to, and I think lives very much amongst the male population, is the idea that being too vulnerable isn't worth the risk because it allows yourself to be potentially hurt or taken advantage of. And to that, I would just say, you're absolutely right. It does open you up to that. But what you receive in return for that risk is so much more. The ability to connect with people, the ability to get to know people on a human-to-human level, by having two people that are both being open about their uncertainties and their flaws and their feelings, and their experience, their genuine experience of life and what it means to be a human being, right? All the things that are involved in that. Yes, there's a risk of getting hurt. Yes, there's a risk of being taken advantage of. But connection is one of the deepest human experiences that we can have. And by preventing ourselves from being vulnerable, we're cutting ourselves off from that amazing experience. And that brings me to my next point. Vulnerability is the ultimate source of connection. Whether it's with your friends, whether it's with your family, whether it's your romantic partner. Because by being vulnerable, what you're really doing is you're being authentic. And something about us human beings is that when we see people being authentic, we know it. We recognize when someone's being real. And it allows us to be so much more open to what they're saying and what they're doing and who they are. And the exact opposite is true. When someone's inauthentic, when someone's clearly not being themselves, or they're putting on a filter or a mask when they're connecting with you or trying to connect with you, we feel hesitant. We feel hesitant to trust them too much because we know we have this bullshit radar and we know that something's not right. When someone refuses to admit that they're wrong, something's not right. When someone refuses to admit that they feel disappointed in a situation that they naturally should and that it's okay to do so, we feel like we don't trust them. When someone presents themselves in a way that just doesn't feel right, it doesn't feel as fluid as it should, we put our guard up. It's like people that preach this idea that of always being positive. Everything's positive, everything's all right, just think positively. Like those, it sounds good, but even those people, it's hard to connect with them because they're ignoring the completely other half of life. The half of life that isn't positive, that has negativity in it. That isn't always cheery and blossomy and running through a field of flowers. The thing with vulnerability is that even if you ever have a pet and you've ever had a dog, for example, it's like in the animal world, you see animals roll on their back and expose their bellies. They do things that allow themselves to be literally physically vulnerable, and that builds connection with them socially. It's the same thing with human beings. It's like how in certain cultures you bow when you meet somebody. You're bowing because you're making yourself vulnerable. In the days of swords and arrows, if someone bows, they're saying, I'm putting myself in a vulnerable position as a sign of respect, as a sign of not seeking to cause harm. And that builds connection in a weird way, right? We want connection through vulnerability. We don't want connection through people showing us a version of themselves that doesn't reflect who they actually are. And we can feel it. But most importantly, being vulnerable allows you to build a connection with yourself. Because the more and more I verbalize how I feel, and I verbalize my uncertainties in life, and I get to know myself and I build self-awareness, I'm really forming a connection of love with myself. And in doing that, it allows me to extend that to everyone else around me. And it's we're a constant work of art. We're constantly working on that, and it's a lifelong pursuit. But it's worthwhile. It's the deepest form of connection. And sometimes I wish we had more male figures in the world, notable male figures, that were able to express that, to be examples for other people. Because when you allow yourself to be vulnerable, what you're really doing is allowing yourself to be seen. And when you don't allow yourself to be vulnerable, all you're exposing to people is a shadow of yourself, a shell of yourself. And when I say seen, I don't mean seen as in physically seen. I mean seen as in felt. You feel people when they're being honest with themselves. You feel people when they're being true and they're not trying to have you perceive them in a certain way. When people are being fake, we know it. And we don't like it. One of my favorite animes is a show called Full Metal Alchemist. And in this universe, there's a universal law. It's called the law of equivalent exchange. It's an alchemy law. And the law basically is this. In order to obtain, something must be lost. Something must be given up. And I think this is true for life. And the truth is, in order to obtain connection, something of equal value must be given up. And to me, that thing that's being given up in order for us to connect with other people, it's the idea that you are giving up the part of yourself that is based around your ego. You're giving up the part of yourself that yearns for approval and acceptance. You're giving up the part of yourself that is ashamed or embarrassed because you still haven't quite gotten a grasp of what it means to be human. And the truth is, we're always trying to figure that out. No one ever really knows what it means to be human. No one ever really knows what it means to live a perfect and ideal life. And so to get connection, we have to give up those things. We have to give up certainty. That's really what it is. to build connection with other people, we have to give up certainty. And certainty comes when you let your guards down, you open yourself up, and you allow yourself the potential of being hit in the deepest parts, your deepest, darkest parts. But this law of equivalent exchange, it's equivalent. You're giving up something that you have, and you're putting it all on the ground, on the floor, and you're laying it out. And in doing so, in being vulnerable, that's where the connection comes from. And although it's a fictional law from this show, I see there's a lot of truth in it. Vulnerability is sort of like the gift that keeps on giving. Because what happens is when you are vulnerable, like once you notice something about yourself that you want to express, it's really hard to do. But then once you do it, once you've been vulnerable, you, as a reward, you gain this sort of clarity about yourself. And you get to see new areas of your being that you quite didn't see before. And it gives you more opportunity to be vulnerable. And when you do that, in return, you gain further and further clarity. And then it becomes this loop of self-awareness development, where you are vulnerable, you gain clarity. With the clarity, you see more opportunity to be vulnerable. With that, you get more clarity. And it just turns into this wonderful self-awareness pyramid where you're just constantly growing, you're constantly going higher. And what, in my opinion, what kind of does is it gives you the opportunity to almost cleanse yourself. You can show up every day as who you are. You become one with yourself. Because over time, you've developed yourself and you've shined the light in all the dark spots of your being. And there's no rock unturned. There's nothing about yourself that you're hiding away. And this takes a long time. This could take decades. This could take your whole life. But it's a worthwhile pursuit. Because the more you do this, the more you get to know yourself and be vulnerable, the more you connect with yourself. The more you connect with yourself, the more you can connect with everyone else in your life. And it turns what maybe could be a very gloomy and sad life into one that's absolutely beautiful. Unfortunately, some people look in the mirror every day and they see a stranger looking back at them because there is no vulnerability. There is no connection with themselves or others. They're too comfortable with who they are, and who they are isn't real. So there is no self-awareness. And they have no desire to change it because it's uncomfortable sometimes, because it's scary, because it feels embarrassing, because it feels weird. As a result, they're going through their life every single day, not even being sure who they really genuinely are and what their potential is. You probably see those people every day. Maybe it's your next door neighbor, maybe it's your coworker, maybe it's the wealthy billionaire, maybe it's the celebrity that is always taking pictures and always looks picture perfect on the outside, but on the inside, they're full of uncertainty and they're scared. And you don't want to be that person. You don't want to be the person who has failed in every relationship they've ever been in because they didn't even know themselves. How is the other person supposed to know them if they don't even know themselves? Because they've never been willing to explore themselves, to discover themselves and open up and be who they really are. You don't want to be that person. I certainly don't. Being vulnerable is an investment into yourself that pays you in the form of insight, which you can continue to invest back in yourself. To normalize being vulnerable and being comfortable being yourself is the greatest gift you can give yourself for quality of life and happiness. It literally is the gift that keeps on giving. Well, I don't know if it's literally, but it's certainly figuratively the gift that keeps on giving. And I'm not saying that you should strive to let everyone in the world know everything there is to know about you. I'm not saying that. We all have jobs. When I go to work, most people don't know anything about me on a deep personal level. And I'm fine with that. I don't care for them to know necessarily, because at work, in other areas of life, you're paid to be someone else, or your job, your role is to be someone else. And I'm fine with that. But during your normal everyday life, where you're free to show up as you are, if you really want to connect with yourself and others, if you want to form deep, meaningful relationships, true self-expression, true vulnerability is a way to do it. You want to work on sharing your opinions. You want to work on being able to understand who you are and express that. You want the way people perceive you and the way you truly are yourself to be as close as possible. And the reality is this can be a lifelong pursuit. But what is more worthwhile in life in terms of contributing your effort over decades and decades and decades than the idea of developing knowledge of self and self-awareness? I can't tell you. If there's something else more important than that, more worthwhile than that, I'd love for you to let me know. Because I'm right here on that same path as you, trying to figure it out, striving to be a better person, but striving to be more in touch with who I am. Always trying to be more and more vulnerable. And for me personally, these videos is one of the ways that I do that. It's one of the ways that allows me to put myself over the edge and share more of myself at a level that I never expected I'd be able to do just 5 years prior. So we're all on this journey together, and I hope that this video in some small way has helped you do that for yourself, and will continue to help you do that for yourself. I know I was talking more directly to men in this video, but regardless of whether you're a man or woman, if you're just a human being, let me know. Have you ever struggled with being vulnerable and expressing yourself more deeply and truly in life? And if you have, what was the source of that struggle? What made it hard for you to be vulnerable? And what have you done? What have you found that worked for you to improve? I look forward to hearing your answers down below, and I will see you in the next video.